Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the Books on My Nightstand podcast. I'm Kimberly Hartke. Today, I'm here with author Glenyss Lim, who I met in a random chance encounter out in Arizona. My first trip to Arizona, I was exhibiting for my health and wellness business at a yoga fit conference, yogafit.com, wonderful organization that trains yoga instructors. And Glenyss just happened to come in, I guess, pitching her book to the organizers to see if they wanted to carry it in their bookstore, because they had a nice bookstore about books on spirituality, yoga, etc. And I took a real interest in her because she was such a distinguished looking lady and she seemed to have a very pleasant disposition. So I asked the organizer of the event if I could borrow the book. So I had my nose buried in this book while all the yoga instructors were in class, and I read the rest of it on the plane home. And I asked Glenyss to do me the honor of an interview. This is what the book looks like. Oh, excuse me. I want to get rid of my little bookmark there. It's called The Path of Reawakening, From the South Seas to the Stars. So Glenyss, thank you for being with me today.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, you have a wonderful accent. I just told somebody today how charmed Americans are by accents. So maybe you could start off by telling us where you are from originally. I know you're an American now, but where are you from?
I have dual citizenship. I'm from New Zealand, but that makes me laugh because I always found the American accent so exotic and charming. So, and think
well,
ours down under is very banal. So the ironies of life.
That is so funny. Well, one of the things I've enjoyed about your book is that it's a travelogue, it's a spiritual journey, it's a biography. We learn so much about your personal history. So it's not your typical book on death and dying or grief and loss. It's definitely not a straight self-help book, but it's chock full of insights and wisdoms and multicultural experiences that you have around these issues. So I think it's a fascinating read, even for somebody that's not in the midst of a grieving or a loss or facing a death of a loved one. I think just as an independent, avid reader, people will want to pick up this book and read it. So I particularly wanted to point out to our viewers that the book is set up to be a little bit of a journey for the reader. At the end of each chapter, there are lessons, there are themes that she highlights that were in the previous few pages, and then points to ponder at the end, inviting the reader to reflect on the journey that Glenyss took through that chapter, her personal insights, but it invites the reader to challenge themselves to think through these things and how these thoughts and insights and wisdoms affect them and where they are in their life at the time. So I just want to compliment you on the beautiful cover. It's very, very beautiful.
Thank you.
I know every world traveler will want to pack this on the next trip. So why don't you describe a little bit about your professional background and how you became interested in this topic of grief?
Okay, I'll start at the beginning then. I was born in the early 50s, as we mentioned, in New Zealand, onto a sheep farm. We had 1,500 sheep. I was there with my parents. I was the oldest, and I had a 15 months younger sister and a brother. We learnt the values of hard work, being out in nature, understanding the cycles of life. I mean, these were not formal teachings. We were just surrounded by those things. And I always had a strong sense of place. Mm-hmm. In family, extended family, and geographically, strong roots in the community. So I had a very externally stable background growing up. At the same time, I carried a lot of anxiety. And I never had the framework or the language for it. I didn't understand this. And I always used to think, how do you shouldn't have to feel like this. How do you change it? And I saw and felt all the suffering in the world and people around me. And it's like, I just had this intrinsic desire to relieve it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't till decades later when I came to understand that I'm an empath. And a lot of what I was feeling wasn't my own. Certainly some was. And I didn't know what to do with that.
So you were absorbing it from your environment, maybe your parents, the schoolmates, what have you.
Yes, exactly. So I had all that going on, and so my interest just naturally seemed to flow into the helping services, if you like. I went on to university, social sciences. In my summer holidays, I worked in an obstetric hospital. The next summer in the city, at the Salvation Army, a home for unmarried mothers. And I decidedly use that term, unmarried mothers, because that is a reflection of the place and the era. It was very stigmatized. Women and girls had to go away and disappear with a great aunt or some such for months and had their babies, and mostly adopted them out. Mm-hmm. So I was gathering experiences and learning about other people's pain and the richness of life, really. Then I went into medical social work in a hospital setting and saw different aspects again there. And when my children were young, I went to nursing school and became an RN, as you would say here, a registered nurse. And so the path just continued. An enormous influence on me was my first workshop of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Life, Death and Transition, a 5-day live-in experience where we did our own work. I always say I'll never know whether I would have had the courage to go to it, because here I was, a professional in hospice at this point, and here's this icon, and we have her down under. How fortunate we are. And I must attend circumstance. But it wasn't till I got there that we soon learned we were doing our own work, our own externalization of emotion, because in the end, we can only help someone as much as we grow or understand ourselves. So
very interesting. Yes,
that really, I was going to say, took my life upside down. Actually, it expanded my life enormously, because I mentioned how I'd had these feelings. I didn't know what to do, and I'd been to this class and these courses and these trainings, but it was like, why do I still feel like this? Mm-hmm. But she gave us the link, or it was my first experience of it. It was marrying the head and the heart, or the head and the body. We've got to tap into the emotions. You know, in our modern world, we tend to separate these things out, and it's just not so. We're a package deal. So that opened a whole vista for me. And from that, I ended up going to Lynn Andrews' gatherings and teachings for 6 years. She's a shamanic woman. I explored energy healing, trained in that, and I'm talking over a long period of time, really. I trained in sound healing as a modality. I've been certified in TRE, trauma and tension release exercise. So, and all of these things involve grief. Loss and grief. It comes in many forms.
And what's interesting is you were in the medical profession, but yet your avocation was pursuing all of these alternative health modalities and even spiritual healing, spiritual modalities for healing, which I thought was a really interesting dichotomy. It makes you quite a fascinating woman. It really does. I think you're very unique in all the world, and I feel so lucky to be talking with you right now. So
yes, all the way through, I continued in mainstream. And in my latter years, I'm now retired, in from the official system, perhaps the last 10 years, I had the opportunity to blend within the system. I had some forward-thinking CEOs that allowed for this blending.
Yes,
It's
I thought
very
that was a real
comprehensive.
heroic part of the book. I was very glad that you had that enabling environment that enabled you to diversify the offerings beyond the medical into the interpersonal and the spiritual and the human condition side of things.
Exactly. Of
Really
course, it
nice.
always has its challenges, but having my RN, working in the system, having my personal credibility enabled that to blending.
Mm, excellent. And also your maturity in the field. When you're older and wiser, people tend to trust you with more latitude.
Right.
If you were a 20 something trying to do energy healing in a hospital setting, they might be like, "Ugh."
Right. One has to prove oneself along the way.
But
Exactly.
yes,
Understandably.
you gain their respect. Now, tell me about your personal journey through grief and loss.
Um, well, first off, I've probably done everything imaginable wrong somewhere along the way.
Haven't we all?
And, and when I say wrong, I don't mean that as judgment, but working it through in ways that were unhealthy or unhelpful. But we all do the best we can at the time with what we know and our patterning. I talked about being an empath and having these feelings and feeling people's around and wanting to relieve that. A point I think is interesting, when I was 10, my maternal grandmother, who was a very big part of our day-to-day lives, was told she would live for 2 weeks.
Oh,
And, well, myself too, but certainly my mother, who had her own anxieties and beliefs and things should be done certain ways,
mhm.
she was in absolute panic.
I bet.
Terror. And as it happened, my grandmother lived for another several decades. But what I didn't understand at that time, I had taken that on board. This was living in my body long after she was deceased.
Hmm.
And that was something that came out for me at the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross workshop.
So you had to let go of all that stress that you carried for all those years because she did outlive that diagnosis by many years.
And that's the irony. The head and the emotions don't, they just are. They don't work together necessarily because that emotion, that energy was trapped in one's cells. I mean, it's true of us all. And that's why I'm sharing that, because I think it offers us insights about ourselves potentially. And I had the family pattern where we were originally British stock, the stiff upper lip and living on a farm, and you worked hard and you just pulled up your socks and got on with things. And you didn't have your emotions displayed. In fact, if anything, they were to be hidden. So those are the things.
Calm and carry on.
Yeah, correct. So these are the things they brought in with me that needed some work over time. But of course, I had to learn that that's in fact what they needed. My personal journey, just the usual things in life that we go through. And again, I'd want to mention this because I think it's interesting to think about. When I left home and went to university, I got terribly homesick. We probably all had our share of that. But I pointed out because it is a loss. It is a grief. Loss and grief come in many forms. It's not just death or some of the bigger ones that we associate that label with. So they all impact us in some way. And then in my last year at university, I fell in love with the man who later became my husband. Now that was earth-shattering because, again, got to think of the society and the era, early 70s. He was Chinese in a very white society. He was from Malaysia, a student from overseas studying, and my family were devastated. Essentially, I lost my family emotionally and risked physically losing them.
Mm.
And it was tough because I understood where they came from, even though I didn't agree with them. But and I'd been the goody two-shoes, the people pleaser, and here I was having to find my power and stand in it, at least externally, as I quaked and quivered inside. So what one imagines is going to be a happy time in one's life was a very mixed experience, to say the least.
I bet.
But these are the times we grow from, we evolve. And my whole world opened so much wider. And as I mentioned, he was from Malaysia, and we went to there, and I saw this different culture, just so many things that just blew everything that blew my worldview apart, I guess, is what I would say.
Yes.
So,
and it sort of charted the course of your life in terms of your ability to travel across cultural boundaries and learn from people that are very different than you. That explosion in your personal life between your family's rejection of him and your love for him, it broadened your horizons in many ways. And so that's an example of how a great loss can turn into be a great gain for somebody.
Precisely. And I do want to add here, my family worked through their stuff, and they came around to accept him and were wonderful grandparents and so on. But at that time,
it was sort of groundbreaking.
From our losses, as you said, so many positive things come.
Yes.
We have a circle that's our world view, based on our family and our experiences and our faith. And then we have these shattering experiences, and we evolve, we grow, that circle becomes bigger each time we have one of these experiences. And often they're experiences we think we don't want. We need them. I mean, I personally believe they are predetermined, the path we've chosen, but everyone has their own beliefs and outlooks on these things.
Well, it's a helpful outlook to have, that there's gain or there's possibilities in every great disappointment or loss. It's a more positive attitude. You can either overcome a circumstance or be sucked down into it in a negative way. And I think resiliency is something to strive for. It's not always easy, but it does make us stronger to have these hard knocks.
And to understand that life is a school.
Is a what now?
A school.
Oh, a school. Your accent was interfering there.
Yes. And that we come here for these experiences to grow. And, no one says it's easy, but we leave very different from when we arrived.
Yes. And what would you say was the biggest key to finding your way to the other side of those disappointing griefs, those losses? What was...
Okay, and one more I will add in there, because that would be disingenuous if I didn't. Perhaps the biggest one for me in my life was after 26 years of marriage, going through a divorce. And as I said before, I've done many things wrong in the process of grieving, but each experience we have, and in my case, exploring some of the healing modalities, I've gained tools on the way.
Right. And that's what I wanted to talk about next, is some of the most important tools you found. But was there one key for you personally, one special something that you feel you want to give to your readers in this book about getting through and on the other side of grief?
One's a little hard for me.
Would you want to just go on to my next thought, which is give us the top 3?
Sure. It's just that I have multiple, and I burst with so many things racing in the mind that I want to share, and we just don't have that kind of time. Really, the tools, I'm thinking in terms of principles, to recognize that grieving involves pain and work. And for the most part, as humans, we quite content to avoid pain and extra work if we can. They are an absolute necessity if we want to move through.
Okay.
And there's just so many ways within that we can do. A lot of it is about externalizing.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody finds their own. Talking to somebody. I think of so many friends, trusted friends over the years, bless them, that I've talked to when I've been going through heavy duty stuff. And just hearing yourself and repeating the story ad nauseum sometimes until something shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Could be through artwork, can be through writing.
Journaling.
Journaling, precisely. Sometimes we have trouble connecting with it, dependent on our emotional makeup. Play some music that's sad for you, something that's triggering to help you tap in if you are one of those folks who tends to block things. Sound healing, using your voice, expressing, somatics, getting the body free, letting it out.
Mm-hmm.
Wailing, making sound. If you've got anger, express it.
Mm-hmm.
There are just 3 rules with that. Keep yourself safe, keep others safe, and protect the environment. But otherwise, just let that rage or that anger out. These are the steps. There's not one thing or one moment that we've come through it. And we can think that, well, we've finished. Oh, good, I've dealt with that. And then lo and behold, it will sneak back. But as a spiral, it's changing each time we work with it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and maybe getting a little less and less each time.
Precisely, it's spiraling into a narrower spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually the emotional tone changes. So that we live with something, we can remember it, but not have overwhelming emotion. Breath work, anything that slows our body, that brings us present. Because when we are spiraling, I'm using spiraling differently here, but spiraling out of control, getting overwhelmed with our feelings, we bring ourselves back into the body. It brings us present. And we have just the now. It gives a reprieve and it helps balance it. And that's simply the breath work, holding ourselves firmly, feeling. When we're noticing our body, we're down into our center and we can't be spinning out.
Would getting a massage on a regular basis help a person?
That's certainly a tool. Yes, it calms that nervous system down. It refocuses, brings you into the present. Yoga is a wonderful thing. You know, the list is a mile long of sensory body things we can do, and they all contribute in some way.
Yeah, maybe Tai Chi, because that's slow, beautiful movements. Maybe just stretching extra when you work out or something.
Well, they're all body methodologies. Yes, attention to the here and now. They work beautifully. Binaural beats are something I would like to mention. You can get them on YouTube for stress, anxiety, sleep. They help regulate the brainwaves, which are the masters of our nervous system.
Are those videos that say something about megahertz? They say how many megahertz the vibration?
Some may, but it must say binaural beats, and you need to use headphones, or just buds, for the benefits, because essentially how they work, there is one sound or vibration in one ear and another sound or vibration in the other ear.
Oh.
And the gap in hertz between them is narrow enough that the brain is tricked, if you like, into hearing it as one sound. And therefore it crosses the corpus callosum, the biggest amount of white matter in our brains. And it regulates brain waves. Again, as I said, the masters of the nervous system. And I've used them myself, and the feedback I've had from people using them has been nothing short of phenomenal.
Well, how do you spell binaural?
Good question. B-I, as uni or bi, neural, N-A-U-R-A-L, aura, like your aura or aura is, binaural.
And if somebody's not dealing with grief, is that still a healthy practice to do for 10 minutes a day? How long is a typical video on YouTube with these beats?
Oh, they have them all sorts of lengths. So I tell people, listen to your own realities and your own body and what feels right for you. But
it's just a general good practice for everybody to try.
Oh, absolutely. So many of these methodologies and tools we talk about, they apply to us all through life, anytime, because we're evolving beings. Our body is wired for us to heal and grow. We just need to support it, or sometimes get out of the way.
Something you said about grief earlier made me think, well, grief is just like every other thing in our lives. Well, I guess it's when you were talking about hard work. You said hard work and something else. I forget what it was. Do you remember?
Oh, pain
and hard work. You know, our jobs are pain and hard work. Our family relationships, when they go south, are hard work and pain. You know, learning a new skill is hard work and pain. And when we put grief in that context, grief is just like every other thing that we have to do in our lives.
Yes.
You know?
And it's with us at all times, in varying degrees, varying intensities.
Right.
It's there along with the happiness and the joy. We might be standing at the kitchen peeling vegetables, and you might have a wave of sadness over something, or just out of the blue something pops up. So it's not something separated out, which sometimes I think we tend to think, because we've formed these theories to help us comprehend and understand some of these things, but it's pervasive.
Well, my problem with grief is reoccurring thoughts about my mistakes of the past that I super regret, and they haunt me. And that's not even about a big loss. It's just about a character weakness or a flaw or something that I did that, you know, I wish I'd never done.
Right.
And I'm hoping someday that those thoughts, you know, cycle out totally, but it's not like they haunt me daily, but they come back and they're very vivid and they're very strong, and they produce a lot of emotion, a lot of grief.
They're there. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talked about that in the framework of forgiveness. At any time in life, but certainly in that dying phase, it's about forgiving other people, but it's about forgiving yourself.
Yes.
Ultimately. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but we can start with creating affirmations, changing the mental tapes.
Yes, that's awesome. Now, do you have any more important tools for processing or overcoming grief that you want to share before we move on?
Well, that was the principle of pain and work. The other thing that I think is very important is rituals.
Tell us more about that.
Because that's another form of externalizing feelings, concretizing them into this world, here and now. Well, certainly we have a lot of rituals around death and funerals and those kind of things. But all sorts of other rituals. Oh, I know, I knew there was something I wanted to say. One is having what I would call an altar, but use whatever word you like, a sacred space in your home. If we're talking about somebody who's passed on, we've lost, create this spot in ways with mementos that mean something to you. Again, there's no right or wrong in all of this. Perhaps a picture, a fresh flower, lighting a candle, a piece of jewelry. Maybe you want to draw something and put that there. Those things they're subtle yet extremely powerful.
Well, one thing that helps me is I'm a numbers person. I love numbers. And my father was with Century 21 Real Estate Company. So whenever the number 21 shows up in my life, I'm like, my father's still with me. He still cares about me. He's loving me from afar. And sometimes I even go, hi, Dad. Like we'll
Yes.
sit in a restaurant booth and I turn the card and it's booth 21, you know.
Absolutely. These symbols, these messages from the other side, they are very real. Learn to trust them.
Yes. And then in the gym, we even do 21 reps for Dad. That's how my husband, who's my workout buddy, how he gets me to do more pushing the weights or whatever. He'll say, come on, you're at 15, but we got to go to 21 for Dad. So it's become a real ritual and a theme to look for that number everywhere.
Absolutely. And as you are honoring, trusting it and recognizing it for what it really is.
Mm-hmm.
One hears of many wonderful stories of the communication from the other side.
I have a friend whose father died her freshman first few weeks in college, and she was walking to work one day, and her father ruffled her hair with his hand and said everything's going to be okay. After his death, and she is so vivid, it's so real to her that happened, and that was very reassuring to a freshman who she was very close to her father. He dropped her off at school, and then 2 weeks later he was gone. So when she told me that story, I realized why she had such a strong faith in a higher power and in heaven and the afterlife, was because of that experience.
Right. And the gift we can give somebody else is accepting it, not poo-pooing it, realizing this is their reality. They have had a communication in all probability.
Yes. Have you ever read any books by Lorna Byrne?
Lorna Byrne, I don't believe them.
She's an Irish mystic, and in the book Angels in My Hair, she talks about those sorts of occurrences that happened to her. I think the story was she lost a baby, and after the death of the baby, there was a knock on their window, and it was basically a message from the child she lost.
Yes, some people experience it as feathers, a certain bird. The list is endless, things that are meaningful to that person.
Right. Yeah, somebody once said that when a black crow was in their backyard, they knew it was their relative that had passed on. Just they had a kinship with that kind of a bird. Do you
another thing for grief too is checking out near-death experiences. YouTube has a whole lot of those.
That's a wonderful idea. That's a wonderful idea, because it is very consoling to me that my dad is still alive. I talk to him in the shower.
Yes, absolutely.
I tell him, Dad, I love you.
Parents, yes.
You know, I want you to be proud of me. I told a gentleman yesterday, one of my motivations in my business life is to make my father proud. And he's not on this plane anymore, but I still care about how he feels about my performance of my life, you know.
They just in a different form, literally through the veil.
Yes. So let's move on, because I know there's so much wisdom that you could impart, and we want to try to keep this YouTube short, you know, but what special advice do you have for widows or widowers? I know
I'm going to be difficult and go back and first, just as a tapering off on the other piece, giving a couple of quotes from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross about the purpose of pain, etc. And I think it's just so helpful.
Okay.
Very fond of saying there are no mistakes, no coincidences. All events are blessings given to us to learn from.
Mm.
There's a lot in that. And she talked about canyons. We would never see the beauty of their carvings if we protected them from the windstorms. It's another way of expressing how we grow and evolve from our sufferings, from our challenges. We have the opportunity to grow from them.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I just had a need to throw that in. But
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rushing you. I just know you probably have a huge list of things that you could share.
No, I need containment. That's perfectly fine.
I was going to say something about that first Kubler-Ross quote. That would be really nice to place on a bathroom mirror and read every time you go into the bathroom to wash your hands or brush your hair, because I do think meditating on a positive, perspective like that could really be a game changer for somebody that's struggling.
Again, it takes work. We have to bring ourselves back to that.
Yes.
Out of the morass and give it a context that has a higher purpose.
Right. And I've been known to make a bookmark out of a scripture that's very meaningful to me, so that every time I'm moving the bookmark through the books on my nightstand, I reread that positive scripture or quote. So I recommend creating little tools like that that are very practical and easy to implement in your life.
Absolutely.
So your advice for widows or widowers?
And widowers. I think a really big one is to give yourself permission to move forward. So many people get stuck because they feel as if they're letting down their deceased partner by feeling okay, by having a good time, by meeting new people, by perhaps developing a new relationship. I think we need to we can choose to hold on to the fact that they're in a different place now. They are loved, they're surrounded by love, and they have a much bigger, broader, wider perspective of what this third dimension, this life is really all about. And there's nothing they want more for you than for you to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big one for a lot of people.
I bet it's hard to accept that, because you feel like, oh, they will be jealous of my new life, or I'm not honoring them if I get over this.
Oh, exactly. Again, no judgment. It's a very almost natural feeling that people go through, but if they can give themselves permission and perhaps, again, a tweak of the perspective can really help. Even somebody who before they passed had a hard time with it and weren't so sure they wanted the other person to move on. They're in total different energies now. They're in that love. They understand things that we can't even understand about what things are like over there. So there's that. Also, don't glorify the one who's passed over. Or if you are, idealize. If you are, recognize it as a part of grief, a phase of grief that you are going through. I had a girlfriend back when, she's passed on herself now, but she was a mature nursing student when she was in her 40s, and she had moved over from Australia, and she recently lost her husband. And, I was still learning a lot of things. And I just took at face value this perfect relationship she'd had and this perfect man. It was like, wow, how can you live up to something like that? Over time, I came to understand she was simply going through that phase of idealization. And in time, she was able to share more fully the fullness of the relationship, if you like, because no relationship, no matter how good, is perfect. I mean, we all have our irritations or whatever it may be, or different interests, etc. Also, what is common, people tend to think their own grief is more profound, deeper, harder than anybody else's. And with it, their love was greater and deeper than anyone else's. But pain is pain, love is love. It's okay, but just it's helpful, I think, to recognize those sentiments for what they are. And remember, you did love the person and you still love them. It's good to include them in conversation to other people. They've been such an intrinsic part of your life. They're part of who you are now. It's our experiences that make us who we are. And those have been very deep, often long-term, powerful connections.
One of my friends taught me this, that grieving parents who have lost a child, it's still very important to recognize that child's birthday, even after they're gone.
Yes.
Or maybe the anniversary of their death even.
Yes.
Because it's something that they still feel very powerfully, and they appreciate it not being ignored.
Precisely. Honor that what's been and this person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was another one around children that went through my mind. Anyway, I think that's gone.
Okay. What did you learn in your journey through grief and loss and nursing that would benefit caregivers and other nurses about preparing somebody for death?
Do your own personal work. Are you comfortable with death and dying?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to be comfortable with the person that you're supporting around that if you're not. That's really important. And equally important, listen with empathy, kindness, come from your heart. A Greg Firth, a New York analyst, talked about accompanying the psyche. We all want to feel honored, respected, cared about, heard, that we matter. And it's really your being that does that. And that opens up so many possibilities in your relationship with the person that you're trying to help. I always remember I was in hospital for about a week or so when I was 18. And he was this very young, naive 18-year-old gone to the city hospital, and there were all these officious people, and I really didn't know what was going on. To this day, 50-something years ago, I recall this one nurse. I'd had a procedure and I couldn't lift myself up, and she came and cut my food up. I probably had her around me 2 or 3 minutes in my whole stay, but the impact now that she has made is just phenomenal, because her being was there. She had compassion. There was a touch. There was a tone in her voice, the look. And that just mattered so much. And we often think, too, when we're caring for people, I won't know what to say. I don't know what to do. We think we have to come up with all the answers. We don't. It is your presence that matters to people. And when I say your presence, your total being, your empathy, your listening, your care.
I had an encounter with a nurse when I had my ovaries removed. I woke up in the middle of the night in the hospital and just started weeping about the grief of not being able to have children. And this really nice nurse came in and sat with me and, rubbed my back. And she said, I know you've lost the ability to have children, but I bet you have a beautiful home and you have a very loving husband. And she just reminded me of what I still had. And I thought that was very compassionate. It was really sweet. And it made me feel that I didn't need to cry anymore, that I could go back to sleep and just let it be, let be what happened. So
what you needed in that moment, she felt comfortable with it. It's so don't run away from pain. Learn to find a comfort with it.
Yes.
Some people have a challenge dealing with tears, for example.
Dealing with what now?
Tears, crying.
Oh, tears.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I could tell she was a little bit experienced on how to console somebody because she did it very naturally, and it was a very simple thing she said. It wasn't, complicated. She just said, yes, but I bet you have other lovely things to be thankful for.
Right.
Mm.
And around that is be gentle with yourself as the caregiver, the nurse. You don't have all the answers. No one's really asking for that. But remember, it's an art, not a science.
Mhm.
And we will make mistakes. Actually, sometimes even very experienced people, because we can't get inside somebody's head. We don't know where they are right in the moment. But we'll get forgiven for that if we're real caring.
Mhm. Yes.
That compensates for it. So yeah, it's an art, not a science. And you'll be
Now,
okay when you're there accompanying that person.
I want to ask you about broaching the subject of death with somebody who's actually dying, because right now my mom is, for all intents and purposes, on her deathbed. She's lost her mobility. Um, she's not drinking or eating too much. She's in that last stage of life, and she's very comfortable. She has round the clock caregiving. But what should I say to her? Is there anything I should talk about with her?
Again, there's no formula, but there are some principles. Some people are in denial and they're not ready to, and may go to their death not ready to. That is their experience.
And how do I tell which kind of person she is?
Right. So we don't whip denial away from people, I guess, is part of the message. It's a little tangential to what you're saying, but it does apply for many people. So it's about questions that are open-ended. How is it for you now? What do you need right now? What are the things in your life that you want to attend to or say or do while you're
That's a
still
good
on
one.
this earth?
That's a good one. She said something to me the last time I was with her about, I don't want you all selling my Yadro dolls. I want them to go to somebody that will appreciate them. And I thought maybe next time I see her this weekend, I should ask her, would you like me to find a collector of Yadro that you could actually meet personally and say that you want her to have the dolls? Would you like me to, search for that kind of a person?
I think that's beautiful because you're showing you heard what she said and you're opening to other possibilities and other conversations. Is there anything else you would like to me to do around your belongings?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, this is a very fortuitous interview, isn't it? You're helping me out in my time of need.
And how do you imagine it's going to be for you moving forward? Asking them that. That can open to their discussion of death or their beliefs.
Okay.
Is there any, you can ask, again, you've got to judge the circumstance and the person, but what are you most afraid of?
I understand from her caregiver that when the caregiver was in the other room, my mom was crying out to God, asking for forgiveness. So maybe if I said that question, she might bring up, I'm not sure if I'm ready to go. I'm not sure if I'll go to the right place. I'm not sure if God forgives me, and maybe I can reassure her. Because I've been praying to that end ever since I heard that she was in that frame of mind. I've been praying about that.
And or a possibility is you could say to her, I hope you can forgive me for blah, blah, blah. And then that creates a whole opening for
Yes.
her to say, oh, I have all these things.
Oh,
So
that'll be opening Pandora's box, believe you me.
okay, and that's where
But maybe I should lance that boil just by bringing it right out, because obviously there's plenty of room for asking for forgiveness. And I have no problem doing that. So that's a really excellent suggestion.
And if she doesn't want to, she isn't ready, she's not going to take it up. But you've created that opportunity. And or she might take a bite-sized piece of it.
Right.
And deal with just one or two things.
Well, I sure hope I get the opportunity to have these conversations with her. So thank you so much. And I'm hoping that our viewers today, that a lot of this is helpful to them. It's certainly been an interesting conversation. Tell me how our viewers will find you and find your book. I know you've got a really nice website. I guess the book is available widely.
Yes, it's available on Amazon. As
Mhm.
you said, The Path of Reawakening, From the South Seas to the Stars, and getting my spelling. Why am I having trouble here?
Move it the opposite way. Yeah, there you
I
go.
know, like this opposite, my brain has a great trouble with that. The spelling of my name can be an issue too, if you go by author. It's 2 S's.
And your website is glenyslim.com.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And are you looking for any opportunities these days, such as public speaking or lecturing at a university?
I'm happy to do occasional workshops and talks. Yes, absolutely.
Limited to Arizona, or if somebody was willing to fly you to Massachusetts, would you go?
I'm willing to travel. Yes, those are things we'd have to explore together. But yes.
Yes. Well, I'm just putting it out there because YouTube is a big universe and you never know who will stumble upon this conversation and say, oh, this lady, she's got what we need. We've been looking for this for a keynote for our convention or something, you know?
Right. Well, thank you. Yes, I'm open to discussion always.
I can see the American Association of Morticians might want to have you. No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. We have to make a little fun over this topic, which is a little heavy, but I just think you've got a wonderful personality and a great spirit. And I thought your book was fascinating. And I really hope some of my followers in YouTube will check out your book, read it, and pass it on to somebody who needs it. Right?
Well, thank you. I feel privileged that you had me. Thank you, Kim.
You're very welcome. And by the way, if you read Glenyss's book, we want you to go to Amazon and do a book review. That's very critical to getting her books higher in the search engines and getting more people to find it. And if you're a librarian, please order it for your library. So anyway, once again, I appreciate your time. I'm so glad that serendipitous meeting in Arizona produced a friendship between us. And I hope that this video goes viral. Please share it on your website. Would you mind linking to it from your website or sharing it in your social media once it's published?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to load it up to YouTube and then send it to you. So.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kim. This has been a delight. I appreciate it.
This has been Kimberly Hartke, and we want you to add this book to your nightstand. Have a great rest of your weekend, Glenyss. Take care.
Thank you, and you.
Bye-bye. Okay, so I'm just going to